Um, I will, when I sit down, switch into the face shield, but I want to welcome again everyone here today. This is the Digitizing Hidden Collections Symposium closing plenary entitled Real World Ripples, Current Events and Digitizing Collections. I am Hannah Skates-Kettler, in case Katie didn't mention that already, and I'm joined by my colleague, Katie McCormick. The two of us will be co-moderating the session today. Katie and I have had the privilege of contributing as reviewers to the Digitizing Hidden Collections program for a number of years, and have witnessed the many ways that the program has evolved over time. And most recently, we had the opportunity to co-chair the newly redesigned Digitizing Hidden Collections program that asserts the priority of amplifying unheard voices. And we're both very much excited about, or indeed, there's a lot of people who are really excited about that development. The reform of the Digitizing Hidden Collections program is a reflection of the applicants' and reviewers' feedback, the constant assessment and reevaluation of the program by passionate, caring, intentional, and hardworking folks in and out of CLEAR. So thank you for listening. Thank you for not being complacent. And thank you for modeling what CARE can mean to other grantors. So if you would join me in thanking them for their support for this program and for bringing us together here today. So thank you so much to the CARE team. All right, Katie and I are joined up here by our wonderful panelists, Joanne DeCaro, Alexis Rowland, Carolina Villarroel, and David Giblin, who will introduce themselves and their projects, which were funded by the Digitizing Hidden Collections in various funding cycles. Their projects exemplify how the present state of the world inserts, or indeed asserts, itself in unpredictable ways in the work that we do. They will not only provide like a high-level view of the projects, but will also begin to highlight their pathways for developing the projects within their local context. After the panelists make their introductions to themselves and to their work, we will shift to a discussion where Katie and I have prepared a few questions for them to prompt the panelists to share their experience with you all, but also to promote a dialogue between each of them and all of you, right? The panelists even have a question for you all that they would like to convey, and if they don't, Katie and I will be sure to bring it up anyway. So this really is intentionally structured to facilitate conversation. So please feel free as we enter the discussion section to utilize the mics, which are here in the center of the room, and ask your questions, and also to share your experience, right? So this is maybe one of those instances where we're actually encouraging comment instead of discouraging it. So please do offer your experience and perspective as well. It's not often that we get the opportunity to have so many experiences and perspectives within one place. So this is an opportunity to learn from all of our experience, from these panelists here and from each other, and know that the panelists would also like to hear from you. So before we shift to introductions, Katie, is there anything you want to mention that I may have missed?
Not at all, thank you.
No, Your Honor. Okay. All right, great. So we will begin with the introductions. Joanne, if you would, please start us.
Hello, I'm Joanne DeCaro. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of California, Irvine. I research trauma and incarceration and long-term incarceration. I also help run a Leo clinic for paroled lifers.
Hi, I'm Alexis Rowland. I'm also a PhD student at University of California, Irvine in criminology, law, and society. And my area of study is largely prison policy, especially those that affect gender and sexual minority incarcerated people. And I have a history of working in behavioral health in carceral spaces.
So I'm going to now tell you a little bit about prison pandemic. So prison pandemic, we started as a reactive response to the crisis of COVID-19 in prisons, especially in California. I, along with 3 professors and another doctoral student, all of whom study the lived experiences and consequences of incarceration. We watched anxiously as COVID-19 ravaged California prisons in the spring and summer of 2020. California's San Quentin State Prison took on the dubious distinction of having one of the largest COVID-19 clusters in the United States in the summer of 2020. More than 2/3 of incarcerated people were infected and 25 died. Given the close connection to incarcerated and formerly incarcerated community myself and my team members have established over many years, we are not at all surprised by the intensity of the COVID-19 outbreaks at San Quentin. But the predictability of the outbreak was all the more infuriating, and we were desperate to find ways to communicate with and support the people locked inside our prisons. Myself and my colleagues started brainstorming over Zoom about what we could do. The faculty on our team decided to write a few op-eds about the importance of protecting incarcerated people and staff, arguing that they are not as removed or separated from our communities as people would like to think. But infections and deaths kept rising, so we started a campaign to raise money to make donations of protective equipment to state prisons in our vicinity, responding to incarcerated people saying they had no access to masks or soap inside. We produced a short video with currently and formerly incarcerated students about people's experiences of the pandemic in prison. We sought to make connections between our work as educators and our obligations to support and protect students. People talked about the lack of access to protective equipment, being locked down in their cells with no access to activities, exercise, education, or even phones, missing their families, and who they were prohibited from visiting in what turned out to be over a year or more. In the process of producing this video, we learned that people inside were not only scared and isolated, but also desperate to tell their stories and to know that someone from outside prison was listening. Although a number of organizations had started to gather data about infection rates and prison policies, none were actually talking directly with incarcerated, listening or sharing their stories. So we scrambled to set up a hotline that could collect calls from prison. That's the only way incarcerated people can call out. And to staff with graduate students and undergraduate students from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday. We did that for 2 years. We started spreading the word on social media and through community organizations, and we set up a P.O. box too, in case people had access getting to the phones, which turned out to be very true. Or if they weren't and didn't want to use their limited time, oftentimes only 15 minutes throughout the entire week to call us. We started to build a website where their stories could be shared, so people who felt silence could know that their voices were being heard and more widely accessible. Giving voice to the incarcerated is a central goal of this project because prisons are designed not only to keep people from ever leaving, but also to keep all outsiders from coming in and gaining access to the conditions and concerns of incarcerated people. It's very hard to gain access to prison, and it's unheard of in our field and others to collect firsthand testimonials from incarcerated people at this scale in response to an ongoing crisis. From the beginning, we are essentially concerned with ethics and with protecting vulnerable populations. We wanted to make a repository for as many stories as people wanted to share, make these stories available to a wider public to increase awareness to the crisis in our prisons and bring voice to the numbers of infections and deaths as quickly as possible. But while doing that, we understood that it was very important to protect our contributors from any breaches of confidentiality or retaliation. The very real and present concern of retaliation from correctional officers and other incarcerated people for our contributors is something that has weighed heavily on us since we started this project and has been the guiding force behind our many layers of redaction policies and other protective measures, which we discussed in more detail at our panel yesterday. Our project initially focused on collecting calls and letters from the 35 state prisons in California. At the beginning of the pandemic, the California Department of Corrections housed roughly 100,000 people. We were able to, within the first year of the project, successfully outreach to all 35 state prisons. In the second year of the project, we expanded to collect stories from 51 county jail systems, 9 federal facilities, and 2 ICE detention centers. We have received over 600 phone calls from incarcerated individuals. We have also received over 4,000 letters. We've been able to put roughly 1,500 or more of these stories onto the website, and we are adding new stories to the site regularly. To manage a project of this nature, we have had over 250 undergraduate student volunteers and field study students. We have recently redesigned our website to make the site more story-centric. Oh, well, there's our team, but I'll show you the site as well. Here we go, and we welcome you to come take a look at it. The main modifications is that we have added an advanced search feature to filter by date, facility type, individual facilities, topics, and contributor type. We've also added a collections feature to the site to allow curated collections of stories that can pull stories from across the entire corpus. Beyond the use cases originally imagined by the prison pandemic team, our growing list of citation reveals the way others have integrated the archive into their own projects. The Vera Institute of Justice, UCI Law, and others have used stories from the archive in several of their recent reports regarding COVID-19 in prisons. Similarly, UCLA has been ingesting and qualitative coding transcripts for upcoming reports on prison conditions. Most recently, we were cited by sociological scholar Hadar Avram in their law review article on prison litigation strategy. Publishing an archive is in so many ways more exciting than publishing just a paper, which we are accustomed to as academics. A paper's use cases are quite simple. Other scholars will cite you. Occasionally, a reporter might too. In rare cases, it might be used to make policy. But we are very excited to see all the creative ways people have been and will continue to engage and use our collection. We're now just going to show you a few images from the collection so you can get a look at some of the materials. This is a scan of a letter. As you can see in the next slide, we go through a very long and complex redaction process with many layers to make sure we are protecting our subjects. This is us working in our office, the actual process of sorting drawers and drawers full of letters. Here's an example of some of the piles of mail we received. We've also had the work been used in very numerous creative and artistic endeavors. This was a play created about the prison pandemic project, in which myself and others were characters in this play. It was amazing to see yourself as a character. We recently, and actually it's currently running at our university, is that we have an art exhibit where people, those are actual real decommissioned prison phones, and you can hear the stories and testimonials from calls that we took from the hotline on these phones. So it's a way for our students and for others and community members to be able to come and listen to the testimonials in an interactive way. We also put up artwork and letters. So these are people viewing that. And then we also recently created a podcast. So we encourage you, as another method to engage with the collection, is that if anyone is interested, to please check out our podcast on some of the items from the collection. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Hello. My name is Carolina Villarroel. I'm the Director of Research of the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage Program located at the University of Houston. And I'm here to talk about the program and this specific project called Periodicals in the U.S.-Mexico Border. So a little bit about the program first. The program, like I said, is located at the University of Houston, and it was founded 30 years ago by a group of scholars all over the United States who were concerned about the research and the things that they were finding through their research, you know, in houses and historical societies, what amounted to a vast archive of the content that was not being preserved in the traditional archive. These are materials produced by Latinos and Latinas in the U.S. So they decided to, as a response to the traditional archive, the institutional archive, to create this community archive, alternative archive, mainly digital, to locate, preserve, and make available all the written legacy of Latinos and Latinas in the U.S. from colonial times until 1980 now. So it's a huge project with hundreds of scholars associated to it, undergraduate students, students at all levels. And so the program, it's in reality a program because we are working on different areas of research. We recover manuscripts, collections, and newspapers that is part of this specific grant. So we started collecting newspapers that we have in-house right now, 1,430 newspapers in different formats, Microfilm, we used to do a lot of microfilming in partnership with other organizations and institutions, and that's not done anymore, so we're digitizing now. And we started digitizing materials when the highest resolution was 90 TIFF, so it's a long time ago. And so we had to evolve with time, and these are some of the findings that our scholars have done throughout the years. The first newspaper you see to your left, the first newspaper published in the United States in Spanish, it's called El Mississippi, and it was published in New Orleans in 1808. So that was the first newspaper. You also have the first newspaper published in Spanish in the Texas area is the second one. And then we have trilingual newspapers that speak about the experience of being Latinos and the land that they inhabited at that time, like La Abeja, that it was written in English, Spanish, and French. And then sorry, it's very difficult to talk with this. And then the experience of women, Latinas, right? If people thought that Latinos were not participating in the written culture in the United States, much less women, right? Latinas. So we have found that is not true. We found many examples of the Latina participation, and you can see some of them. La Voz de la Mujer, for example, and Feminismo Internacional, an early newspaper that positioned Latinas within the feminist movement, for example. And then maybe 85% of our collections are in Spanish, but like I mentioned before, Latinos and Latinas were also writing in different languages, and as you can see, we also recovered newspapers in Ladino, the language of the Sephardic Jews. These newspapers were published in New York, and the Ladino community was very close to the Latino community at that time. And as you can see, it's a challenge to work with these newspapers because we don't know Hebrew, and this is actually a mix of Hebrew and other languages. So we're looking for experts to help us to translate this. But if you speak Spanish, and the spoken Ladino is very similar to Spanish, so you can actually understand. So this grant, first I want to thank CLEAR and the Mellon Foundation for providing funding for this project that is so needed, and because and you'll see later why it's an urgent matter at this time, like it is for many of our collections. So the goals of the project. It's to digitize 200 newspapers by May 2023. It's to preserve the content and create access and discoverability. So for that purpose, we will build a bilingual open source platform. And in Omeka, we decided to use Omeka because it's the platform that we're using, and we hire a developer to do that. And I wanted to mention that decision of using Omeka, all the software that we use, we decided early on through the U.S. Latino Digital Humanities Project that is part of the recovery program to use software that is readily available and open and free, because we want to be able to go out to our communities and to for them to be able to use it in turn if they wish to do that. So one of the things that we decided, like I said, was to use free software, and this is one of them. So the scope of the collection, it's the periodicals covered, from Brownsville to California, all the territory on the United States side of the border and across the border with Mexico. And as you can imagine, some of these archives are in peril right now, especially on the other side of the border, because it's there is not a budget to preserve them. So throughout the years, we have been working. We have partners in local communities, but also in international repositories with Cuba, Puerto Rico, and other countries in Latin America and Mexico, of course, to partner and preserving these newspapers. So these newspapers are in-house right now, and we are collaborating now with them and describing them and sharing the information so they can upload and have them available or linking to our website. So This is also a huge contribution to interdisciplinarity because it will serve as a research tool for different departments, as the recovery program is right now, and border studies and international studies, history, etc. So the methodology we we wrote our own best practices that you can visit on our webpage. And we used, our best practices are based on social justice and the recognition of labor. So our students and everybody involved in any of our projects have their name attached to it at all times. So because we're very conscious about, that this is important for our students' future, and they want to reference to it, they can, and we help them how to incorporate that into their resumes. So that is one of the core parts of our program, and also working ethically with our communities. And because of that, we also follow the post-custodial model, and we've been doing this work, post-custodial work, since before it was called post-custodial. So, I'm old, but and it's a way, and we can. Our communities can trust in our work, and we can build bridges to work with our communities. And it's been successful until now because we're not about appropriating the knowledge of our community, because this is the knowledge of our communities, but rather to work together to preserve this. It's such important work that they produce throughout the years, and for our kids to be able to have access to it. And so one of the things that we decide, aside from the software to be available, is to be for people in the community to be able to access it in their phones. We recognize, we talk about different communities. We want for our researchers in academia, the academic community, our student community, and then our community at large. And we want for the community at large to be able to get into their phones and to see what we're doing and how we are preserving and making available their knowledge. And we use Dublin Core. We create bilingual metadata. It's very important, not only because most of the materials are in Spanish, but because we want that audience, we want the people in the community to be able to access the information. So the challenges, if you can run the video, please. So some of the challenges are, as you can see in the photographs, it's newspapers come to us incomplete in many cases because they were not being preserved. It was supposed to be a video, but it's fine. They're incomplete because, like I said before, they were not preserved. So sometimes what we have is just a fragment of a newspaper, like you see in some of the cases. Or when we're very lucky, we receive a complete run, but that is very rare. Every single piece tells a story. And it is believed that Latinos and Latinas published around 2,500 newspapers from 1808 until 1960. So we have bibliographic control of 2,300 right now. And like I showed before, we have in-house almost 1,500. So in different stages. So this speaks about the need, but also about how our communities don't see themselves represented in the institutional archive, because they don't deem their archives, their personal archives or family archives, as important enough to be part of an archive. So they disappear and they throw them out when they move. So when they realize how important this is, they get really emotional, and it's really hard to see. So, it's a fraction of the community. The other part of the community are very involved, and they want their archives to be part of the archive. So, as you can see now in the video, these are fragments, and this is a family that donated their collection. They were publishers in Laredo and across the border. And some of the newspapers came in this condition. It's like a puzzle. The students and our colleagues were able to, put it all together. But I don't remember, and I don't know if you saw the bag with the little pieces of newspaper that speaks of the importance of the newspaper for the donor. And obviously we can't do anything with that newspaper, but just to have it in that format is so important because it's a proof of existence. And I think ultimately it's what we're looking for. It's a proof that we exist, that the Latino community exists historically, and that we're here, and that we're not going anywhere, and that we're part of the American culture. So if we are missing this part of the culture, we all are missing. So these are some of our goals, and this is the project that we are developing right now. Thank you. Oh, you can stop the video. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me in the back? Okay, thanks. My name is David Giblin. I'm the collections manager and research botanist at the University of Washington Herbarium at the Burke Museum. And I'm going to share with you my collaborative project with Eric Duchesne at Western Washington University and Steffi Eckert-Bond at the University of Alaska to digitize vascular plant specimens from the Russian Far East. And the title of my presentation is not the title of our grant proposal. Obviously that changed over this past winter, but that's kind of what in some ways our project has become. And I just want to say on behalf of Eric and Steffi and myself, we're so flattered to have this project funded. It's really an honor to be here today to share it with you. And I want to thank Katie, Hannah, and Nancy for making this session possible. It's really wonderful to be up here and sharing our project with my colleagues here. In terms of the overview of my presentation, I'll just give you some background on the project, share with you the digitization activities and workflow, and then talk about some of the impacts and issues that have come up as a result of the project. And so I thought the best place to start is, what is a herbarium? Because I realize maybe not everybody's been in one, or perhaps even heard of one, but herbarium is a botanical research collection that typically comprises 3 organismal groups: plants, and that includes vascular and non-vascular plants; fungi, macrofungi, you can think of those mushrooms, and lichenized fungi; and then algae, marine and freshwater algae. And all of those specimens are dried. Some of them are pressed, some of them are stored in 3 dimensions. In the broad sense, they document taxonomic diversity and the distribution of that diversity over space and time. And herbaria support really a wide range of research, whether it's alpha taxonomy, molecular systematics, climate change impacts, rare species diversity, rare species biology, invasive species, these kinds of things. Really a broad use of the collections. And so if you were to come into a herbarium, you'd see a lot of steel cabinets. If you opened any one cabinet, you'd see a bunch of folders. Inside of any one folder, you'd see specimens, at least the vascular plants, and that's my area of expertise and what the project is focused on. And the sheets of paper are standard in size, they're 11 by 17 inches. The specimens are pressed, they're dried, they're 2-dimensional, and every specimen has a label. And at the very least, it has the scientific name of the specimen and the date of collection and the location of the collection. And we need both of those objects in order to have a research specimen. We couldn't have a label without a specimen or a specimen without a label. So everything, in my particular collection, we have 400,000 of these specimens, primarily from the Pacific Northwest. So why digitize vascular plant specimens from the Russian Far East? Well, it turns out there's a very long history of plant exploration in the Russian Far East among North American and Russian botanists. It actually dates back to the 1850s. So people have been collecting plants, pressing them, drying them, archiving them in herbaria, both in Russia and the United States. The Russian Far East is of particular interest to those of us in North America because of what we call floristic affinities. Many of the species, and if not species, genera of plants, that occur in Russia also occur here in Western North America. And there are those of us who are interested in the origins of our flora, and so the flora of the Russian Far East informs those and other studies. Since the 1990s, actually, there's been an extensive amount of collecting in the Russian Far East by North American botanists. My colleagues Eric and Steffi have both been there. There was a project at the University of Washington from the mid-90s to the early 2000s to collect in the Kuril Islands and Sakhalin Island. So there's a lot of specimens that have been gathered and that are just sitting in herbaria undigitized. For better or worse, the reality is there's not a lot of digitization going on in Russia. And so we have this wealth of information, and we're looking to liberate that. And also, you know, there's the likelihood of doing field work in Russia going forward is certainly uncertain, given the contemporary times. It's even to the point where we try to send them specimens, and for whatever reason, they get sent back to us for unexplained reasons. Anyway, so this was a collaborative project, as I mentioned, between the University of Washington, University of Alaska, Western Washington University. And the goal of the project is to digitize 23,000 specimens from the Russian Far East held collectively among our institutions. And for us, digitization is a three-part project, a three-part entity. It's a digital label, a specimen image, and a georeferenced locality associated with that specimen. So that's our goal over the next 2 years to complete that. In terms of our activities and workflow, we each have a working list of species, genera, and families that we can go into the folders. Again, these things aren't digitized, so how do you find what you don't know you have? But we have a list of species from skeletal records. We manually search the collections. So this is a student who's working for me, go into the collections, they have the name, they find the specimen, or the folder of specimens, they pull them out. You can see Ghislaine is imaging the specimens. We have a light box that's on top of it is the digital SLR camera. We shoot in RAW, we convert it to JPEG, and we barcode the specimen. And you can see that there's a laptop there that's tethered to the digital camera, so that's how we capture the images. Once the specimens are imaged, then we can actually go into our database application, which runs locally in the browser. We have an image of the label, and then that information gets manually transcribed into respective fields. It turns out that not all of the specimens from Russia are mounted, and by mounted I mean on 11 by 17 sheet of paper. So we have students now, as I'm talking, who are going through unmounted specimens with field notes. That's just she's got field notes leaned up against the computer, and she's transcribing those specimens, those specimen notes. And as I mentioned, we also are georeferencing the specimens. So we have a software service embedded in the database application that allows us to do a text search. If that doesn't work, then you go to Google, and at the very least, we're able to assign oftentimes a fairly exact, but if not a fairly crude geolocation for each specimen. We publish the specimen records freely available online. Primarily, they're going to an online database that I manage. The Consortium of Pacific Northwest Herbaria brings together over 3 million specimens from over 50 herbaria in the Pacific Northwest. So that's the first place where this goes. And I just did a search here, pulling up specimens so that you can see what that online search looks like. The arrows are pointing to the fact that there's 5,900 specimens from our collections, of which 5,600 are georeferenced. So we really get great distribution data associated with this collection. And you can see on the right all the specimen label text comes in the query results. And then there's a thumbnail image that if you click on, you get a 1 megabyte image that comes up in your browser. And actually from there, you can download about a 7 to 10 megabyte higher resolution file if you need to look in greater detail. There's also a second smaller arrow there on the right, which shows you can download the specimen query results in a variety of formats, including a text file, so then you can mobilize it to other applications. Ultimately, those data are also going to be served through the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which is the world's largest repository of natural history specimens. I think there's over 1 billion records there, and so we're in the process of making sure, creating connectivity to that resource so we really maximize access to the specimens. And so just finishing up in terms of impacts and issues, it's really, our award started in May of 2021. We couldn't get started till October of 2021, in part because of COVID, summertime, other things. But we really, I feel, are making great progress. There's free worldwide online access to the specimens, and those specimen availability has already resulted in communications from Russian colleagues requesting to see those specimens. So, I mean, in very short term, we're already seeing a return on that, on these activities. We're liberating and mobilizing specimen data that without funding from CLEAR would not be accessible. And so I can't underscore how important this funding is to a lot of people around the world. It's so remarkable. And so we're also really creating full realization of collaborative field efforts that have gone on since the 1970s. And if any of you have ever done field work, you know how much goes into making it happen. I mean, there's all the planning, so many things have to go right. And then you get these specimens back, and they just sit there, and they're inaccessible, and that effort is not fully realized. So we're really, thrilled that we're making that come to fruition. And lastly, we have undergraduate students involved in the process, and digitization is pretty far removed from most of their studies. But it turns out that we've had various digitization projects ongoing, and the students stick around. They come back year after year. They, for whatever reason, they gain valuable knowledge and experience. As far as the issues, I guess the one question I have is whether or not there are any ethical concerns regarding the digitization of specimens that originate from a country at war. And I will just say, I'd be curious what people think, but I'll just say myself, I personally don't have any ethical concerns, but I may not be the best person to assess that. And I will say one thing I didn't include on my slide here, just from a personal level, is I find myself thinking about Russia a whole lot more and a whole lot differently than when this project started, and for better or worse. The degradation of the U.S.-Russian relations really threatens future collaborations. In 2011, Dr. Valentin Yakubov came over from Vladivostok to identify hundreds of specimens associated with one of the projects I mentioned. And it was just a wonderful experience. And we took him out in the field, and it was just wonderful. And it was funded through philanthropy, and we probably could get something comparable going again if the situation was right. But those kinds of experiences are certainly threatened. And then lastly, I just feel like what's happened really underscores the importance of digitization in general. I mean, we should digitize everything as soon as we can, because the world changes and our opportunities change, and they may not be the same tomorrow, next year, that they are today. So lastly, I just want to thank CLEAR, Mellon, the National Science Foundation, Far Eastern Branch of Russian Academy of Sciences, and then the 100 collectors who've deposited their specimens at the collective herbaria that are involved with this project. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing the details of your individual and institutional projects. You've heard details of 3 very different kinds of projects engaging with different types of materials and different kinds of communities. As I was listening and reflecting and thinking about where we might go in conversation, some phrases came up for me. Caroline, I think you stated specifically proof of existence. And I think each of the 3 projects seeks to, through digitization, to create paths for proof of existence, whether those are for individual people, for communities, potentially even the vascular and floral history or flora. history. I'm not a scientist, so I'm working on it. The scientific history that relates to our climate change questions and other aspects. In that process, developing understanding, and through digitization and sharing of these different types of projects and information, it is truly about connecting broader communities, variant audiences, in the process of developing understanding of cultural, scientific, and human history, but also experience. I think too, each of the projects, something that connects them in discussion for me, or has the potential to, I think, is in some ways the potential for the digitization may provide, or these kinds of projects may provide for repatriation of history, of agency, of voice, of scientific evidence that may not exist because of physical borders, geopolitical issues, or other world events that may enter into that, and that in each of these projects there is a centrality and great potential in the navigation of relationship understanding and relationship building, whether that's with individuals or communities, or where those relationships may be disrupted by external events. So these are big ideas and big concepts that enter into the space for digitization projects that may not be the place that each of you started when you thought of the actual work, or when you wrote the grant. But I wonder if we might talk as a group about how, now that you have worked through some of the stages of your project, how you might think differently, or how the work you did has influenced your thinking about the potential for connection and presence, importance in our current world that maybe you hadn't started the project with. That was a convoluted question. I hope you can.
Well, so I think that going through the project, it's the sense of urgency still there, and that idea of digitize everything, right? Why we need to digitize everything, when I know that many archives said, no, you don't need to digitize everything. For us, and I can see, and for a specific program, it is necessary, because there is not other proof of that. That newspaper that you saw that we were putting together is the only copy available. So for us to digitize everything, it's a matter of, the proof of existence that I mentioned. I mean, it's the only proof that we have that piece of document existed, but not just the item. It's a whole community behind it, and I think thinking about that. Years ago, when we were starting, we knew that we wanted to make these newspapers available, and we worked with EBSCO, with Newsbank, with some of the newspapers, to try to make them available to our scholars, right, for studying. But then now that we are working with digital humanities, and we created this U.S. Latino Digital Humanities Center for Latinos, and we're finding these ways through CLEAR, specifically and Mellon, to this grant, to think how we can present this research or these newspapers in our own way, right? To make it available, to make it searchable. But then we're finding all these problems too. So OCR was not taught with other languages in mind, for example, and our newspapers are in Spanish. They didn't think about the fragmentation of the history and the documents. So all these things that we had to deal with these past 2 years, and think about how we make it accessible, how we, the people that created this in the first place, have access. Those are some of the things. I don't know if that answered the question.
I'll say for our project that when we started this out, we were really interested in this rapid digitization, that we wanted to be able to get these collections online as soon as humanly possible, because we were hoping that there could still be an opportunity to have a real world impact in how people are being treated in prisons and other carceral institutions in California. So we were in this panic mode of just, like taking the calls, getting them transcribed, getting them redacted, getting them processed as soon as possible, and throwing them up as fast as we could. That way there'd be, like you said, this proof of existence, this evidence of what was happening on the ground in these institutions. And really, thanks to CLEAR and this amazing funding, is now we've really had the opportunity to kind of step back and say, okay, not just for this immediate moment, but how do we now preserve these items for the future, that this has value beyond just this immediate kind of maybe whistleblower framework that we had in the beginning, and say that people should know 50 years from now, 100 years from now, what people in California experienced in prisons. The true horror of what has happened in these last 2 years needs to be well documented and known, while still trying to balance that with the need to get this information used in meaningful ways. Right now we're working with UCLA law to process these, so that way they can document them for legal uses. So we have to balance both very carefully still going through our redaction process, while knowing that people are very desperate to use these in very immediate real world ways. And it's a hard balancing act to kind of have caution to make sure we're protecting our subjects and making sure that they can be engaged with.
Yeah, I just want to add also that in having the time now to sort of think through what this really means beyond getting this information online right now, if people can use it, is as far as proof of existence goes, there's also this idea individuals are incarcerated, there is proof of their existence, right? But it's the the state archive, right? People are stripped of their identities and replaced with this really distorted, polluted image of what it means to be that person, right? And these digitization efforts are really important to creating and writing against that archive, right? Demonstrating that these people are, fully realized human beings who have been caged by the state and who have been forgotten during the pandemic. And this is a way that we are, in turn, writing against, right, hegemony in that way. I think a lot of people who do prison studies tend to throw around terms like voices from the inside, or amplifying incarcerated people's voices. But it really is, I think the effort, this writing against hegemony really underscores why that's so important, and it's just not lip service, and that's so salient to these digitization practices. And that's not something that really hit home for me until maybe a year into this project, about just how it's really important to us.
I feel like some of the issues that I deal with seem so trivial in a way, because they're biological, and those might be good problems to have. But that being said, I do look at the world through that lens, and talk about representation in terms of the specimens. Imagine going to a library and not knowing what books are in there. Do the books on the shelves exist if they can't be discovered and they can't be read, and the knowledge inside can't be utilized in some way? So that's this idea of proof of existence is really important for us, because really these specimens, without being digitized, they don't exist. They're not. No one knows the names of them, where they came from. And I'll just say that this idea of evidence and proof is also important in scientific context. One of the islands that was surveyed as part of this study from the 1990s to early 2000s blew up. It was a volcanic island. It no longer exists, and we have a comprehensive list of the plants that were there. And so that's just a small example of why proof of the past is important, at least in my line of work.
I really appreciate the conversation that we've had so far and this kind of um, emphasis on proof of existence. I think that's a good place to start. And one of the things that I find to be like baked or implicit within that is a consideration of audience. Like I hope you don't mind going down this rabbit hole for a second around audience. Like how did you all conceive of or consider your audience in the creation of these projects, and how that may or may not have shifted given the events that have happened and impacted your various projects, whether over the last 30 years or even more immediate than that? Questions about for whom we're creating these collections or with whom we're creating these collections.
Okay. So I think I've been mentioning our ideas before. It's something difficult to try to navigate an audience when it's so broad, right? And so I mentioned before that we speak to different communities: the academic community, the student community, and the community at large. So not just for this project, but other projects that we embarked on, we think we need to think about how we build something that everybody can use, and it has a wider audience in that sense. That it has the academic rigor, that our students can create knowledge through it, and but also that it's available or open for a community member that is just curious, for the historian and the community that is trying to recover, their own newspapers, or for everybody in that sense. So it's something difficult to navigate, and I think we're getting there. We're trying to work on that, and I think that's. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, I would say we have a similar challenge of that we really wanted to create this whole project, and we did from the beginning with community advisory board members, with community organizations that we work with, by creating this archive for the community that we serve, for incarcerated people, their family members, formerly incarcerated people, that their voice should always feel present, that it should always be, we're not using it. The worst fears kind of in research on prisons that it would be something, like a salacious or tantalizing or things like that, and making sure this feels grounded and part of the community, while still trying to balance how this material can be read and interpreted by other groups, how we can present it to educators and students, how legal professionals could see and use this. And there's so many different kind of competing interests that come down to there, while still trying to make sure that we're grounded within the communities that we want to, honor and preserve. And so I think it's for us been a real challenge to kind of imagining all those different groups, what their needs are, and making sure that we're making it as accessible as possible, as wide an audience, while still keeping the heart of the project what it should be.
Yeah, touching on that, I feel like we have I think the audiences that we serve is proximate and ultimate. And the proximate audience is really a community of researchers, of botanical researchers primarily, who are interested in diversity, distribution, and some of the things I mentioned, invasive species, rare plants. And there's all kinds of studies that are that these specimen data will support island, looking at patterns of diversity across islands. Large part of the Russian Far East are small and large islands. So that audience is pretty clear. The audience is less clear is the audience 40 or 50 years from now, that are going to have tools and resources that we don't have today. And we are really committed to serving that audience always. And I'll give you an example from our own lives. That some of these specimens that we're digitizing, they were collected in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Let's go back to the 40s. DNA was not described. These people are just collecting plants, suppressing them, sticking them in archives. In the 50s, DNA gets described. Okay, that's neat. In the 1980s, we developed technologies to extract DNA from tissue and learn all kinds of things about evolutionary relationships and other things. And so I am confident 40 or 50 years from now, there is an audience of people going to want to have these specimens to support their research in ways, questions that we can't envision today. So we're constantly, I feel, again, serving the proximate and ultimate audiences, and both of those needs, I feel like, are met through this effort.
We have more questions, but I do want to be mindful and offer an opportunity as we still have we have plenty of time for discussion, and I want to sort of look out into the crowd, and if we have a question or comment on these issues, please come to the microphone. We'd like to open the discussion to the floor.
Yeah, thanks for this. I'm a big fan of all the projects. I do have a question for David. Particularly, I'm doing this research right now at the University of Michigan for Philippine indigenous collections, and part of the sites that we're studying is the herbarium of the university. And one of the problems I have working with scientists is the insistence to call plant specimens by their scientific name when there's local or indigenous names for them, and that they've been gathered in indigenous land. And also the framing of the project as benefiting science and scientists without acknowledgement and regard for indigenous communities that are still living and existing in those lands. So I just wonder if your project has a way of identifying indigenous communities in which these plants and seeds, and sometimes even considered ancestors of communities, to connect them in that way, because sometimes calling things as specimens and species neutralizes them from their homeland and existence, that then disconnects them from the communities where they're from. So I'm just wondering if you have a perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you for your question. It's a great question. The University of Michigan is a great herbarium. It's world-renowned and a huge place, over 1 million specimens. Yes, I guess there's two answers to your question. Yes, we think about it. No, we don't do anything about it. And I feel like those are two different conversations. You raise a very important point. There's a long history of colonization around natural history collection. There's different terms for parachuting, extraction. You go to foreign lands, bring things back. We assign them Western names and treat them in Western ways. Well, there are, as you mentioned, there are local names and uses. It's really hard to do everything. And this is a topic that's of primary importance at the Burke Museum. How do we serve both these audiences? And I don't have any solutions. It would be wonderful to have, let's just say the Russian project here, to even know who the traditional people are. I don't. It would be wonderful to have the names. We don't. And these are some of the relationships, quite honestly, that are compromised by some of the current events. I don't know how we go about that. I will say that just dealing with my own work, my primary area of collecting is Washington. And there's large tribal lands. It is a very hard thing to initiate that conversation because of a long history that those conversations don't end up benefiting the people that you approach, asking them if you can have something from them, whether it's the local name, the uses, whatever. It's a one-way conversation that ultimately hasn't served them, at least in Washington, traditionally very well. So it's very difficult to have those conversations. And we actually have a tribal liaison at the Burke Museum who we are hoping can facilitate those discussions. But it's not an easy thing to do as an outsider, to go to a foreign land and start asking people questions and give me your knowledge so we can make it available. I'm not comfortable doing that, and in some ways I think it's better to do nothing and acknowledge that you're not doing anything than to do something that may not go well or offend people. But that's just my approach to it. I don't know if that answers your question. I realize long-winded is not an easy subject.
Yeah, I acknowledge that, but the thing is, your response is the prevailing attitude of many scientists.
I agree.
It's very difficult. We can't do it. We don't want to do it. We don't even want to try. I've been in rooms like this, and I just wish you'd say, even though it's difficult, let's do it. Let's do it together, and let's partner with communities. I'm sure people here think that way too.
Yeah, as I say, I totally agree with you. It would be wonderful to do, but so many, like everything, everything requires funding, and without support and buy-in and other things, it's just, yeah. I'm sorry we don't meet yours and other people's needs. It's not due because we don't think it's valuable. It's just maybe we're not good at it. We need help. We need funding. Yeah. Sorry about that.
So we have some additional questions that we can also move on to, but taking another moment here to solicit questions from the audience or comments.
Yeah, just thinking about that issue of funding. One thing I've been thinking about after this panel, but also the whole conference, was thinking about how many resources we're all expending now to digitize these old things, whether they're 10 years old or 100 or 150 years old, and it's this huge thing, and it's so great. And we're all making them accessible right now, but thinking about how we're really going to ensure that they actually are still accessible digitally in 50 years, knowing that the digital files will need to be migrated to new formats, the storage systems will need to be migrated to new formats, the websites themselves will probably only work for 10 years, 15 years maybe. And just thinking about how we're all, this isn't just for you, but anyone, like how we're all thinking about how we're going to continue to make these projects accessible once these individual project grants are over.
I will say it was a shock for us as social scientists getting into this archival work that we met with some people who ran other archives at our institution, and they talked about it as this is their children, that they've taken care of it through their academic career, and they've seen it grown and they inherit it. And we were, I kind of did the metaphor, we're all kind of now having this child together. We're going to shepherd into the future that we're going to have to be with it through its life course. And that, it wasn't just this like 2-year rapid collection and then, like we can forget about it. Not that we would forget about it, but, like we really, it hit home how important it is to be continued stewards of this knowledge. And I think, this is preaching to the choir right here, but we partner very early with our archivist at our librarian, and that was the best thing we ever did, like that, that, having that institutional knowledge and like having the knowledge about how we can collect, how we can think about it for preservation, how we can store and design, and that we knew would be ingested into the UC system, and that we weren't just creating, which I think sometimes happens in a lot of spaces, that, like you have this great idea, but you're not thinking through what happens down the road with it. And so it was amazing to know that we would be able to have it be ingested into their system, that we could have institutional partnership where they would be supporting this. And actually, through our institutional partnership with UCI and with the libraries, is they're now building a whole incarcerated and carceral-based projects and collection. And we've, with other projects, encouraged them to be like, okay, let's create this institution as a home for this. Let's like not just have our project, but let's keep on building upon this. And we've actually been very lucky to have that level of institutional support for the work we're doing there.
Totally. Also, it's sort of like I don't know, I became the team technologist. I didn't volunteer for that position. But I think there's a lot of things we can learn from. I mean, we're so blessed to have the money from here to help fund, for the UCs to archive the work digitally, right? And that will be really effective in keeping things moving in the future. However, you also need to have, as someone who stores an immense amount of personal research data, myself, you need to have backups, right, to that as well. Like back it up to tape, right? Make sure that when, if the servers that are failed, that there's still a backup that you have, that you're responsible for, right? Tape is one reason. I think if you look at how the data storage practices of like very large companies that are storing all of your personal data, it's very valuable to them, and they keep it backed up several times over. And I think if you start to see the thing that you are storing as equally valuable monetarily, or even just like humanitarian sense, there's a real value in investing in these backup systems, right? And that doesn't have to be a huge institutional thing. You can get, hard drive spaces like as cheap as water now, right? You can store a bunch of hard drives in a closet and make it happen yourself. And I think it's worth being a little, I don't know, people think I'm really wild for my data storage practices, and I just suggest that you do the same as all.
And I think that commitment and documentation at all times, the commitment to know that this is bigger than us in our program, that it requires for you to be thinking who's gonna take over next, and train the people that should be involved in the future, the students that are coming down the line. It was there before I came in. It's a lot of people involved in this, and this belongs to a community, specific community that it's a community archive. So a commitment, and you see we're a nonprofit organization, so a lot of the people have been committed for years to this. And then documentation, and we save, we have backups, we follow all the protocols, but then different formats, but then documentation, documentation. We have our students keep a journal with every single step that they take, things that worked, things that didn't work, and then we publish it. That's also a publication for the students. And and so we have a record of everything that we've been doing, and the images that we have, the materials, etc. So that's how we do it.
I'm fortunate to work at an institution that thinks about these things. I'm not a digital archivist, really. I digitize content and publish it, but if I thought about where it's going to be 20 years from now, I might lose sleep over it, and maybe you'd think, well, maybe we shouldn't do it because we don't know what the future is, but I don't see that as an option either. I don't know what the file formats are going to be 20 years from now. I'd like to think JPEG will still be around. I'm sure the internet will look different, but I don't think delivering digital text and digital images is going to go away without some kind of file format migration or something. So I don't want to say I don't worry about it, but what can I do about it is more of a, all we can do is do what we can and hope that these things get resolved as we go forward.
If you don't mind, Katie, I might follow up on that, because the panelists actually had a question along those same lines that I hope you don't mind me saying at this point. Picking up on some of the conversation and questions that have happened so far, there really is an imperative to be able to articulate priority, right? And to follow through on value and priority. And so knowing that like the world happens as one kind of catalyst, but also understanding that all of our local contexts are constantly shifting, with new institutional leadership, with new teams, whatever it looks like. And so the question that the panelists had articulated in one of our discussions leading up to this was really around how folks have navigated institutional support or resistance, whatever that kind of energy looks like, and how that has influenced the approach to sustainability and in adjusting to these changing or shifting priority.
Hi. I kind of wanted to comment and sort of tie in like what I've been hearing a lot through this conference, which is one of the few conferences. So I work at San Jose State University, and I'm cataloging and metadata librarian, but with a lot of project management of digital projects. And this is one of the few conferences I go to where you have a lot of the humanists and like the hardcore digital archivists and IT people. And I think one of the reasons conferences like this are so important is because we bring together these conversations from people who generally aren't actively talking to each other all the time, only kind of when it's needed by the project. So, you know, both of the comments I heard were about like, let's collaborate more. Like, you don't have the expertise, but I do. So let's come together in a situation like this and share and learn from each other and see where we can overlap and work together. So I really appreciated this week, and I thought it was really great, and hearing what everybody's working on and meeting people and doing all of that. So, you know, if what we all come out of this with is, as a community, we're going to work together to sustain all of this stuff, because we can't rely on Google for everything, and we can't rely on Amazon to store everything for all of us forever. Let's see if we can figure out how to do it ourselves with that long-term preservation in mind. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you for that addition to the conversation and for the questions and comments that have come forward. In being a part of the Digitizing Hidden Collections program for a number of years has been an honor and a privilege in a number of ways. In its current iteration, most recent iteration, Amplifying Hidden Voices, the program adopted sort of an evolved concept of the 5 core values. And those values had existed in one form or another. All of you as applicants and projects developers encountered those values. They're situated in their most recent articulation is the value of public knowledge, the value of broad representation, the value of authentic partnership, sustainable infrastructures, and community-centered access. And in the course of the programmatic history, the language of those values has been updated, has changed, has brought us to the Amplifying Voices project. But essentially those concepts were at the root of the Digitizing Hidden Collections project from the start. And I think the projects that we've heard about, the questions that we've been engaging in, the fundamental questions really of what does it look like to have space to invest in the creation of authentic partnership, to know that you are starting from a place, whether that is as an individual, a representation of your organization or institution, your scientific community, your professional space, you are beginning with an idea and a need to feed that knowledge forward through digitization, and that digitization of that material is the way to present voice, and it's sometimes the way to preserve that, to help, again, the sort of proof of existence space. But that the dynamics of that involve communities you may or may not be directly involved in, that we have responsibilities depending on where we are self-situated or situated institutionally to learn about those communities and invest in authentic partnerships while navigating questions of sustainability, institutional agency or lack thereof, shifting world geopolitical, health-related, scientific, whatever notions. Sometimes those influences can come more closely into your institution than you knew. I'm from a state university in Florida. There is a lot happening that I did not anticipate 10 years ago when I started this job. The sustainable infrastructures and community-centered access. Each project starts from a place, and I think as we think about the future and what does sustainability look like, what will this look like in 20 or 30 years, it is increasingly important in my own mind that we not be afraid of what sustainability looks like, because it does look different in different institutions. And when we focus on the 30 years from now and exactly how that will look, we can have a side effect of dampening voice instead of amplifying voice, and finding ways to center community access, community participation, and navigate together and help make those collaborations and connections. We are nearly at the end of our time together today. This has been a really amazing experience. It is so exciting to be together and hear about so many different projects and to explore these questions with our panelists. Hannah, I don't know if you have a closing question or if we want to try to. I'd ask the same of our panelists as you're thinking about positionality, sustainability, why what we do and these kinds of collaborations are important, if you have any closing reflections.
I would just say in my own work, I think of the activity of digitization is just creating access to information in a what I hope to be a neutral way. The idea is to liberate content, to allow people to do whatever they want to do with it. And I might have my own interests in those data, but that isn't what motivates me. It's really creating basic information that other people could use to support their work, their knowledge generation, their exploration, whatever it is. That's, and I really like your point about not being afraid about sustainability of these things, because I'm confident that somebody will figure those problems out. But without the information, it's a good problem to have, because if the information wasn't out there, then we wouldn't worry about sustainability. We wouldn't worry about, your point about collaborations. Those collaborations only become possible when we start, digitizing these things. And I find myself, oh, we've got more content than I could ever possibly. I'm not trained to do this. I need to work with the libraries. And things move forward, not in a linear way, but they certainly, move forward as a result of having stuff to work on.
I'll say that one of the things that we talked about in this plenary was about some of the issues we've had around borders and navigating borders and where our projects cross, and also I think how we align ourselves. So I think maybe thinking a little differently, I don't know if our project can quite be neutral, that, we had to align ourselves somehow in this project. We could align ourselves with the staff, we could align ourselves with lawyers, we could align ourselves with the incarcerated. And I think it's good to, have to be forced to sometimes make those very conscious choices about what voices you're uplifting, what voices you think need to be preserved in spaces, and what are the impacts of those decisions you make. That we had a lot of discussion about how is this repository neutral? We want it to be used by people in ways that neutrality permits, especially in the legal area. But at the same time, when people are just suffering at extreme levels and dying, is neutrality what's important? Or is it taking a more of an activist stance, and how do you walk that line? And I think that's something, especially when it comes to vulnerable populations and how we protect them, while also amplifying that. If anyone here would like to continue to have conversations about that, we'd love to learn from you and your experiences of working with communities, and protecting and preserving those communities.
Yeah, I want to follow up with that. Say that you know, like I am like not directly system impacted. Like I am in solidarity with all incarcerated people in all incarceration facilities. However, like that position is purely in like um, it's purely in a stance of wanting to help, right? And solidarity, and that's why when like if you look at well, research term, like the analytical unit we've chose to look at, right? These stories, people's voices. It's inherently political. We have to. Like liberating that, it's an attempt to liberate people, and those two are totally inseparable. And so this project is, I don't know. I can say for me personally, it is purely political.
Yeah, I think that from the point of view of social justice, right? It's important, the contextualization of the materials and the things that we're digitizing, just not for the sake of digitizing, but with a purpose. We're here to provide context. So these things are not described the way many of the collections have been described in the past for other communities, underserved communities in general. So reparations happened at a description level of collections. It's urgent. It's important. We need to keep having these conversations, and I think these kinds of projects help in that process, because we can sit at the table and talk about it. I mean, how do we describe this very social justice rooted projects that are working in partnership with the communities? So I think that's really important.
I was just going to add that, excuse me, and I know we're close on time here, but this really is like an invitation at this point. I think you heard from our panelists even this kind of notion that these projects certainly are ongoing. I know certain folks here have projects that are ongoing, but this really isn't necessarily about the projects or the project's sustainability. It's about talking through these questions together, and having these opportunities and spaces to raise those difficult questions, as we should, in some cases intentionally, towards amplifying unheard voices or reparations or whatever it looks like. And so this really is, I wouldn't say the start of a conversation. We've been having these, and certainly with the Digitizing Hidden Collections granting program, we always have these, and anticipate continuing. So this doesn't stop here today. I just want to encourage everyone to continue discussing and learning from each other, from our panelists, from your neighbors in the audience as well.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to invite Louisa up to close us out, I think. As she's walking up, we will offer our thanks to our panelists and to you, our audience members who've participated in this dialogue.
This is fun. Hello, I'm Louisa Quasigra, Managing Director at CLEAR, and it's been my great privilege to be part of the team hosting the Digitizing Hidden Collections Symposium. We're so grateful you joined us here in Baltimore to celebrate the program. It's been a whirlwind 26 hours, and we hope it's been inspiring. Many thanks to our panelists and for sharing your project stories with us and your thoughts further, and also to the audience for participating, and of course, thank you Katie and Hannah for moderating. In 2015, when we created the program, we could only dream of what would become possible. The quantity and diversity of materials that would be captured and described, and the creative ways grant recipients would employ to connect those materials to new communities who find meaning within them. Our grantees' efforts are our dreams come true. And we can't say enough how much we learn from them, appreciate them, and want to hear from them as we look to the future. As we close out the 2022 Digitizing Hidden Collections Symposium, we want to acknowledge the incredible efforts that have gone into visioning, designing, implementing, and running this program. CLEAR staff, past and present, trusted advisors, review panelists, grant applicants, and grantees, each has put forth enormous energy to get us here today. I'd like to say congratulations to all. CLEAR would like to thank the Mellon Foundation for supporting Digitizing Hidden Collections for 6 remarkable years, and for continuing to work with us on ways to make rich, broadly representative, accessible, and sustainable digital learning environments possible. On behalf of the CLEAR Grants team, thank you for joining us for the symposium. We look forward to receiving your feedback on the event via a survey that will arrive in your inbox soon. And we hope to see you at another CLEAR event. Thank you.